The HOA president was smiling when those officers knocked on my door. Smiling like he'd already won. I want you to remember that smile, because 5 minutes later, it vanished completely. And the reason why had just walked up my driveway in full uniform. 2 police cruisers pulled up to my house on a Tuesday afternoon, and my stomach dropped straight to the floor. I was standing at my kitchen window, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, watching the blue and red lights flash silently against my driveway. No sirens. Just lights. The kind of quiet arrival that somehow feels worse than noise. My hands weren't shaking. But they wanted to. I had done absolutely nothing wrong. And yet, there I was, watching 2 officers step out of their vehicles, adjust their belts, and walk toward my front door like they had all the time in the world. Behind them, parked at the curb with his arms crossed and a smile that made my skin crawl, stood Gerald Hutchins. HOA president. Self-appointed king of Maplewood Estates. And the most insufferable human being I had encountered in 41 years of living on this earth. I set down my coffee. Took a slow breath. And I opened the front door before they could even knock. Let me back up. Because you need to understand how we got here. My wife Renata and I moved into Maplewood Estates 14 months ago. It's a nice neighborhood, clean streets, trimmed hedges, houses that all look like they were designed by the same slightly unimaginative architect. We knew it was an HOA community when we bought. We read the CC and RS. We signed the paperwork. We were prepared to follow reasonable rules. What we were not prepared for was Gerald Hutchins. Gerald had been HOA president for 11 years. 11 years. In a neighborhood where board elections happened every 2, which meant Gerald had somehow convinced, or more likely intimidated, his neighbors into re-electing him 5 consecutive times. He was in his early 60s, retired from some middle management job he referenced constantly, and he had clearly decided that running a homeowners association was his life's highest calling. The man drove a golf cart through the neighborhood taking notes. An actual golf cart. With a clipboard. Our first violation notice arrived 3 weeks after we moved in. It was about our trash bins. Apparently, we had placed them 6 inches too far from the garage wall on collection day, which violated Section 4, subsection B of the community guidelines. 6 inches. I measured. He wasn't even wrong, we were 6 inches off. But the notice wasn't just a reminder. It included a warning that repeated violations could result in fines of up to $250 per occurrence. Over a trash can. I moved the bins. I didn't fight it. The second notice came a month later. Our welcome mat. We had placed a doormat outside our front entrance, a simple charcoal gray mat that said home on it in white letters. Gerald's notice informed us that decorative items on front stoops require prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee, and that our mat had not been approved. The notice also helpfully included a photograph Gerald had apparently taken while standing at the edge of our property. I emailed the Architectural Review Committee. The Architectural Review Committee, as it turned out, was Gerald's wife Patricia, and a retired schoolteacher named Frank who later told me privately that he just signed whatever Gerald put in front of him. The mat was approved, eventually. 3 weeks later. After I filled out a 2-page form describing the dimensions, material composition, and color palette of a doormat. I still didn't fight it. Then came the truck. I drive a work truck. A dark blue Ford F-250, 4 years old, clean, no modifications. I use it for my contracting business. I've driven trucks my whole career. When we bought the house, I made sure there was a driveway long enough to park it off the street. I park it there every night. It fits entirely within our property. It doesn't block sidewalks. It doesn't block sightlines. It just exists, large and blue, in my own driveway. Gerald decided this was a problem. The notice arrived on a Thursday. It cited a provision about commercial vehicles being prohibited from visible parking in residential driveways. I read the actual provision. It referred specifically to vehicles with company logos, signage, or commercial equipment racks. My truck has none of those things. It's a personal vehicle that I also happen to use for work. No logos. No racks. No signage. I wrote back explaining this, calmly and in detail. Gerald wrote back informing me that, in his assessment, the size of the vehicle constituted a commercial appearance, and that I had 30 days to either garage the vehicle or face fines. I don't have a garage. We have a 2-car driveway and a storage shed. There is no garage. Gerald knew this. He'd walked past my house with his clipboard enough times to have memorized the architectural footprint. I wrote back again. I cited the actual language of the provision. I referenced the fact that my vehicle had no commercial markings of any kind. I kept my tone professional. Gerald escalated to a formal hearing. The hearing was held in the community room of the neighborhood clubhouse, a beige room with folding chairs and a projector screen showing a PowerPoint presentation Gerald had apparently prepared specifically to argue about my truck. There were 3 board members present, Gerald, Patricia, and Frank, who avoided eye contact with me the entire time. Gerald presented his case like he was prosecuting a federal crime. He had photographs, measurements, a printed definition of commercial vehicle from a website I didn't recognize. He spoke for 22 minutes. I spoke for 4. I cited the CC and RS, the specific provision, and the clear absence of any commercial markings on my vehicle. The board voted 2-1 against me. Frank voted with Gerald. Patricia was Gerald. I was fined $150 per month until the vehicle was removed. That was when I decided to stop being polite about it. I contacted a real estate attorney. She reviewed the CC and RS, reviewed Gerald's notices, reviewed the hearing transcript, yes, I had requested a transcript, and sent the HOA a formal legal letter within 2 weeks. The letter was 7 pages long. It outlined the specific language of the provision, cited case law on HOA enforcement overreach in our state, noted that the board's interpretation was not supported by the document's plain language, and formally demanded that the fines be rescinded and the enforcement action be ceased. Gerald received that letter on a Monday. By Wednesday, I had a new violation notice on my door. This one was about the height of my backyard grass. And by the following Tuesday, 2 police cruisers were parked in front of my house. I stepped onto my front porch just as the 2 officers reached the bottom of my front steps. They were both men, one maybe mid-30s, stocky with close-cropped hair, the other younger, tall, still carrying that slightly uncertain energy of someone who hasn't been on the job too long. The older one had his notepad already out. Behind them at the curb, Gerald stood next to his golf cart with his arms folded across his chest, practically vibrating with satisfaction. "Afternoon," I said. I kept my voice even. Friendly, even. "Can I help you?" The older officer, his nameplate read Donatello, gave me a look that was professional but not unkind. "Sir, we received a complaint about a disturbance at this address. Are you the homeowner?" "I am," I said. "Marcus Webb. I can show you ID if you need it." "That won't be necessary right now. The complaint states that you've been engaged in aggressive and threatening behavior toward a neighborhood association officer, and that you may have an unregistered commercial vehicle on the property." I blinked. Slowly. "Aggressive and threatening behavior," I repeated. "That's what was reported, yes." I looked past them at Gerald. Gerald gave me a small, tight smile. The kind of smile that says I own this neighborhood and you're about to find out. "Officer," I said, turning back to Donatello, "I'd like you to know that I'm fully cooperative. I have no issue with you being here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. But I do want to be straightforward with you. I've had an ongoing dispute with the HOA about my vehicle, and I recently had an attorney send a letter disputing the fines and the enforcement action. I haven't been aggressive or threatening toward anyone. I've been communicating entirely in writing. The younger officer, whose nameplate read Castillo, was scribbling something down. Donatello nodded slowly. Do you have documentation of that communication? I have all of it, I said. Every email, every notice, the hearing transcript, and the attorney's letter. I can print copies right now if that would help. From the curb, Gerald's voice cut through the afternoon air like a blade. Officers, I'd like to point out that this individual has been deliberately antagonistic toward the board's authority, and I believe he intends to operate an illegal commercial enterprise from this residential property. Donatello turned and looked at Gerald with an expression that I can only describe as the face of a man who has heard too much nonsense in his career to absorb any more. Sir, Donatello said to Gerald, with careful patience, I'll get to you in a moment. Gerald snapped his mouth shut. But his smile didn't fully disappear. Officer Donatello turned back to me. Mr. Webb, do you mind if we take a look at the vehicle in question? Not at all, I said. It's right there in the driveway. We walked to the truck together. Donatello and Castillo walked around it. They looked at the doors, the bed, the cab. No logos. No signage. No commercial equipment. Just a truck. Castillo glanced at Donatello. Something passed between them, wordless. This is your personal vehicle? Donatello asked me. It is. Registered in my name. My insurance is personal auto, not commercial. I can get you the registration. That's okay for now. Gerald had drifted closer from the curb. His smile was fading at the edges. Officers, he said, his voice slightly louder now, compensating, the issue isn't just the vehicle. This man has been flagrantly violating community standards for over a year, and when the board attempted to enforce those standards through proper channels, he hired a lawyer to intimidate volunteer board members. That kind of intimidation creates a hostile environment and... Mr. Donatello paused. I'm sorry, your name? Hutchins. Gerald Hutchins. HOA President. Mr. Hutchins. Hiring an attorney to respond to a legal dispute is not intimidation. That's a legal right. Donatello's voice was still neutral. Professional. But there was something in it now, a flatness that wasn't there before. Gerald straightened. I understand that, officer, but the spirit of the... Mr. Hutchins, I need you to let me do my job, please. Gerald went quiet again. But I could see it now, the micro-calculations happening behind his eyes. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. He'd expected the officers to show up, look official and intimidating, maybe ask me to move the truck or sign something. He'd expected the weight of authority to land on me. He had not, apparently, planned past that. I stood with my hands in my pockets, calm as I could manage. Donatello was asking me about the attorney's letter, whether I had a copy, whether there'd been any in-person altercations between me and Gerald. No in-person altercations, I said. Gerald leaves notices on my door. I respond by email. That's been the full extent of our interaction. Have you ever raised your voice at Mr. Hutchins? Made any physical gestures that could be interpreted as threatening? I almost laughed. Almost. No, sir, I said. I genuinely try not to give him anything to work with. Castillo, I noticed, had stopped writing. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. And then I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I didn't turn around right away. I heard the engine cut off. I heard a car door open and close. I heard footsteps on the driveway pavement, measured and familiar. And then I heard Gerald Hutchins make a sound I had never heard from him before. A kind of soft, involuntary deflation. Like air leaking from something that had been too tightly wound. I turned around. Renata was walking up the driveway in full uniform. Sergeant Renata Webb. 14 years on the force. 5 commendations. currently assigned to the district that covered, among other areas, the eastern residential corridors of our city, which included Maplewood Estates. She was still in her duty uniform because she'd come directly from a shift. Her badge caught the afternoon light. Her radio crackled quietly at her shoulder. She walked with the kind of easy authority that doesn't need to announce itself. She took in the scene in about 3 seconds, the 2 cruisers, the officers, Gerald at the curb, me standing by my truck, and her expression did something almost imperceptible. Not surprise. More like confirmation of something she'd already suspected might happen someday. "Hey," she said to me. Calm. Even. "Hey," I said back. Then she looked at the officers. Donatello had gone very still. Castillo had actually taken a small, automatic step backward, the way people do when they suddenly reprocess a situation. "Sergeant Webb," Donatello said. And the entire register of his voice had changed. We didn't know this was your residence." "It is," Renata said simply. She looked at the notepad in his hand. "What are we working with?" Donatello paused. He glanced toward Gerald. He glanced back at Renata. And then he did something remarkable. He closed his notepad. "We received a complaint," he said carefully, "alleging aggressive behavior and an illegal commercial vehicle on the premises. We've completed our assessment of the vehicle." He paused again. "There's no commercial signage or equipment. It's a registered personal vehicle." "And the aggressive behavior?" Renata asked. Another pause. "We have found no evidence to support that allegation." Renata nodded once. Then she turned and looked at Gerald. Gerald Hutchins, who had been standing at the curb with his arms crossed and his smile for most of this afternoon, was no longer smiling. His arms had come uncrossed. His clipboard hung loose at his side. He was looking at Renata the way you look at a math problem that suddenly has different numbers than you remember. "Mr. Hutchins," Renata said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "How are you today?" Gerald opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. Fine," he managed. "I'm doing fine, I was acting in my capacity as HOA president." "Yes." She let that word sit in the air for a moment. "My husband tells me you've been having some disagreements about his truck." Gerald's chin lifted. Something stubborn and wounded was trying to reassemble itself behind his eyes. "The community has standards, Sergeant, and as president I have both the right and the responsibility to." "You called the police," Renata said. "To a residential address. Over a parking complaint. There was also the matter of threatening behavior. Mr. Hutchins." Her voice was still even. Still calm. But it had acquired a quality, the kind of quality that comes from years of talking people down from ledges, of managing situations before they become incidents. "My husband sent your board a letter from his attorney 2 weeks ago. Did you receive that letter?" Gerald hesitated. "Yes." "Did you respond to it?" A longer hesitation. "We're still reviewing." "So you received a formal legal communication disputing your enforcement action, you did not respond to it, and instead of engaging with the legal process, you called the police to his home." She let a beat pass. "Does that sound like how a dispute resolution process is supposed to work?" Gerald's mouth opened and closed twice before anything came out. The police complaint was a separate matter. Based on what evidence? Silence. Donatello was watching Gerald now. Not with hostility. But with the kind of careful attention that a person gives to someone who is slowly explaining themselves into a corner. "Mr. Hutchins," Donatello said, and his voice had changed completely from the tone he'd used at the start of this conversation, "filing a complaint that alleges threatening behavior without specific, documented evidence of that behavior isn't something we take lightly. We responded to this call in good faith. We sent 2 units. He held up 2 fingers. That's 2 officers pulled from active patrol duty, plus response time, plus documentation. All for a parking dispute that a 2-minute check of the vehicle has not supported. Gerald's face was doing something complicated. The scaffolding of his authority, the posture, the clipboard, the golf cart, the 11 years of being the most powerful person on this block, was visibly shifting. I wasn't trying to waste anyone's. Did you personally witness Mr. Webb engage in threatening behavior? Donatello asked. Direct now. The professional courtesy in his voice had become a different kind of professional, the kind that asks questions and actually waits for true answers. Gerald swallowed. He was confrontational in his email communications. Confrontational how? He challenged the board's authority. The silence that followed was, I will admit, one of the most satisfying silences I have ever been present for. Castillo was looking at his shoes. Donatello was looking at Gerald. Renata was standing with her arms loosely at her sides, her expression giving away precisely nothing. Mr. Hutchins, Donatello said finally, I'd strongly encourage you to speak with your association's attorney before initiating any further contact with our department. What you've described doesn't meet the threshold for a police response. Gerald looked from Donatello to Renata to me. I hadn't said a word in several minutes. I was just standing there by my truck with my hands in my pockets, watching the whole thing. Gerald's mouth tightened into a thin line. He picked up his clipboard. He straightened his back. I was acting within my rights as board president, he said, and even he didn't seem to fully believe it. That's between you and your attorney, Donatello said. Have a good evening, Mr. Hutchins. Gerald looked at me one more time. I gave him a small, neutral nod. He got in his golf cart. He drove away. Donatello and Castillo stayed another few minutes. They were apologetic, not formally, not officially, but in the way people are when they realize they've been used as someone else's instrument. Donatello gave me his card and told me that if the HOA initiated any further contact that I believed was retaliatory, I should document everything and not hesitate to call. Then he looked at Renata and said, Sorry to bother you at home, Sergeant. She shook her head once. You were doing your job. That's not a bother. When the cruisers were gone, Renata and I stood in the driveway together. She looked at the truck. I looked at her. How long has this been going on? She asked. About 14 months. She exhaled slowly. Why didn't you tell me it was getting this bad? I thought about it. Genuinely. Because I wanted to handle it, I said. I didn't want you to have to be Sergeant Webb about it. I wanted it to just be, us, living in our house. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she shook her head, but there was something soft in it. Come inside, she said. I've been on shift for 10 hours and I want to take off these boots. 3 weeks after that afternoon, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. We found out about it from our neighbor Diane, who actually attends the meetings. Gerald had retained the board's position, for now, but the association's attorney had apparently sent him a very pointed memo following my attorney's letter, advising that the enforcement action on the vehicle was unlikely to survive a legal challenge and that the fines should be rescinded. The attorney had also, Diane told us, raised questions about the police complaint and the potential liability the board carried if I pursued the matter. The fines were rescinded. All of them. 2 months after that, the HOA held its board elections. I didn't campaign against Gerald. I didn't talk to neighbors about him. I didn't post anything online or slip notes under doors. Gerald received fewer votes than the 3 other candidates running for his seat. 11 years. And in one election, it was over. The new president, a quiet woman named Sylvia who works in urban planning and apparently has strong opinions about clear, equitable policy language, emailed me in her first week to introduce herself. She said she'd been reviewing the archives of recent enforcement actions. She had questions. She wanted to start, she said, with a process for ensuring that future enforcement aligned with the actual written language of the governing documents. I told her I looked forward to working with the new board. I meant it. Here's what I learned in 14 months of being Gerald Hutchins' least favorite neighbor. People who abuse small amounts of power are almost always operating from fear. Gerald didn't harass me about my truck because he genuinely believed Maplewood Estates was in danger. He did it because I pushed back, and pushing back threatened the thing he'd spent 11 years building. The harassment was never about the truck. It was about who got to be in charge. And people like Gerald almost always, eventually meet the natural consequence of their own overreach. They escalate once too many times. They call in a favor that turns against them. They fire one too many notices, send one too many emails, summon one too many sets of flashing lights to a quiet residential street. And the whole structure folds. My wife didn't fix this because she's a police officer. She fixed it because her presence clarified reality. Gerald had constructed a version of events where I was the problem, where the neighborhood needed protection from me, where his authority was righteous and necessary. And then Renata walked up the driveway in her uniform, and the officers who Gerald had summoned to reinforce his version of reality, those same officers recalibrated the entire situation in about 45 seconds. Reality has a way of doing that. Park your truck in your driveway. Answer the door calmly. Document everything. And let the Geralds of the world walk themselves right off the edge of the authority they were never actually entitled to. If you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA board member, or any bully with a little bit of authority, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if you think Gerald got what he deserved, hit that like button. Because I'll be honest, watching him drive away in that golf cart still brings me joy to this day.